let's begin with point number one. Point number one deals with IFRS 8.21, that is the paragraph 21 of IFRS 8 operating segments. So basically on itself, it do not asks for any disclosures. It require three parameters or the three disclosures to be made to comply by IFRS 8.21. So in a nutshell, IFRS 8.21 in itself is not a disclosure requirement. We need to check whether the three disclosures that has been asked on the different paragraphs being met or not. That ranges from paragraph 22 to 28. So let's go by the gist. To satisfy the requirement under the IFRS 8.21, the entity need to provide disclosures on the three parameters mentioned on the left hand side. The first is basically how you determine your segments. What are the factors that the entity takes into consideration to determine the segments? The second information is about the profit or loss, about assets, liabilities, and if it is applicable. The third thing deals with the reconciliation. If these three things are disclosed in the financial statement, we are complied by IFRS 8.21. So let's move to IFRS 8.22, the serial number 2. As we discussed, we need to define what are the factors that the entity has taken into consideration to determine the segments, any judgment that has been taken for the purpose of aggregation. So I'm not discussing any detail on what do you mean by aggregation, because we're going to discuss it in the another playlist where I'm going to explain you in detail what's IFRS 8's core concepts. Here I'm assuming you have an idea on IFRS 8. So let's drill down further. And the second point is the product and the services. So when we go by the gist says it may be in the nature of businesses, even geographical region and the business segment. The thing is, IFRS 8 did not define any geographical or business segment. So basically, it's a distinction from the old IAS 14, and we can combine, and we basically when we move to point number double A, the basically they what the standard asks for, what are the factor, what are the economic condition that you take into consideration to combine those segments, and the third one is the product and services from which you generate the revenue. So let's drill down to point number 2, 2.1, the basis of segmentation. They basically have 6 divisions, and the divisions are based on the products and services, which can be termed as business segment. I'm not saying it's business segment, but it can be termed as a business segment. And because they require different technology and the marketing strategy. So we are complying by this requirement, how you identify the taken into consideration, what the factors that you took. We've taken the technology, marketing strategy, and the different product and services to take into consideration to determine the reportable segments. Did we add any aggregations? It's deal with 2.22. This is another disclosure. However, the farm and plantations have been aggregated into two operating segments, being ship and palm oil, and they have same economic characteristics. So these are not the same entity I'm talking about. This is basically an illustrative of the disclosure. If you are combining two of the operating segments to report them together, and even if you provide a disclosure like this would be suffice. The third, the second point would be the type of products and the services from which the reportable segments derive its revenue. So these are the reportable segments, and these are the operation. So standard paper in itself is a reporting business, reporting reportable segment, and its main source. What this segment does is like it's buying manufacturing of pulp and paper. So basically, they purchase and sale these pulp and papers. They recycle under recycled papers. Under forestry, they cultivate forest resources and related services. So basically, these are the sources from which the entity derive the revenue, pardon me, which the segment derive the revenue in order to comply by the requirement of IFRS 2.22b. IFRS 2.22b. So that's enough for this video. we're gonna discuss we're gonna discuss more on later videos. Now let's summarize. The first thing, 8.21 does not have a separate disclosure requirement if we comply by IFRS 8.22228, which means paragraph 22 to 28 will comply by IFRS 8.21. 8.22 deals with three factors: the how did you determine your segments and what are the factors that you take into consideration, the aggregation criteria, and the product and services from which each and every segment derives its revenue. So these are two areas we need to look into.